Very good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to this Rainbow Children's Hospital webinar series. I welcome you all to this evening of academic session. Today we'll be discussing about the role of newer anti-epileptic medications. I'm Dr. Lakshmi Narayanan, Senior Consultant Pediatric Neurologist and Epileptologist at Rainbow Children's Hospital, Chennai. So the presentation outline for today is we will see initially epilepsy treatment, how to approach practically, before going on to the actual topic of what is the role of newer anti-epileptic medications in the treatment of childhood epilepsy, and rational polytherapy, meaning combining more than two anti-epileptic medications to achieve control when patients fail to respond to one or two anti-epileptic medications. I'll go through 6 case scenarios, and at the end we will discuss. So if you have any queries, please type. There's a tab questions. Please type in the tab questions. Please do not type in the tab chat. Please do not use chat box. So we will discuss these questions at the end of this presentation. So when we approach epilepsy, this dichotomous classification of focal versus generalized epilepsy is always very important for us to approach the investigations, the etiology, as well as what kind of treatments are needed for these patients. So focal epilepsy and generalized epilepsy, this is very important. And in this is the electroclinical diagnosis. What we mean by electroclinical, we take a detailed history of seizures, the frequency, pattern, or different phenomena, everything. In addition, we look at the EEG to get the clues where the seizure is coming from, whether it is a frontal or occipital or right or left. So that gives us a clue whether it's a focal epilepsy or generalized epilepsy. So it's an electroclinical diagnosis. So once you know this dichotomy, then we go into the etiology. This is simplistic model where you have a lesion or underlying cause that is known as symptomatic focal or symptomatic generalized epilepsy. For example, there is a gliosis, scar, or cortical malformation that causes epilepsy, that is symptomatic epilepsy. It's due to an underlying cause, that is obvious. Idiopathic, when we call, even after extensive investigations, nothing turned out. And some types of epilepsies, by looking at the electroclinical pattern, we know this is idiopathic. Say, for example, benign Rolandic epilepsy is one of the examples for idiopathic focal epilepsies. Likewise, childhood absence epilepsy. These two are the most common epilepsies as pediatricians you will come across. So these two are examples of prototypic idiopathic epilepsies. Childhood absence epilepsy is idiopathic generalized epilepsy. Benign Rolandic epilepsy is idiopathic focal epilepsy. So you can have a focal epilepsy that is idiopathic or generalized epilepsy that is idiopathic. When you have done extensive investigations and the etiology is unclear or unknown or hidden, that is cryptogenic. So this simplistic model will be very useful. We usually, by symptomatic, we mean structural or metabolic cause. Any metabolic disorder causing epilepsy comes under symptomatic. Usually the genetic causes come under idiopathic epilepsy, but now with the explosion of molecular diagnosis and many different gene discoveries in the recent years, many of the genetic epilepsies go under symptomatic as well. Say, for example, genetic epileptic encephalopathies, genetic West syndrome, genetic Dravet syndrome, all these will come under symptomatic epilepsy, not idiopathic. The examples for idiopathic epilepsy, as we already discussed, benign Rolandic epilepsy, benign occipital epilepsy. The current terminology for benign epilepsies are self-limiting pharmacoresponsive epilepsies. Even though we prefer to use the older term because of the familiarity, benign Rolandic epilepsy, many of you would be easily recognizing. So that's why I'm using older terminology. Going forward, what are the treatment goals? When you have a patient with epilepsy, what do you want to achieve? Basically, we try to control the seizures, but the single most important thing is it's not just a seizure control alone. Just count the seizures and start the medication. It's not epilepsy treatment. We need to look at the child as a whole, and we have to try to minimize or not having adverse effects. The aim is to provide best possible quality of life rather than seizure freedom at all costs. So for this, we need to have a realistic targets, treatment endpoints. Sometimes in a drug-resistant epilepsy, when they have multiple daily seizures or multiple weekly seizures, some of the seizures, very brief ones, lasting for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, occurring during sleep, or otherwise not causing any injuries, not causing any problems, or compromising with the vitals. We call these less problematic seizures. Sometimes we accept these. Try to accept these small seizures, brief seizures, when a child has so many seizures, when we try to target treatment endpoint. So the toleration of brief seizures usually reduces adverse effects. So that is very, very important. It's not that you have to control each and every seizure, not necessary. So coming to the treatment of epilepsy, here one size fits all doesn't work because the epilepsy treatment is tailor-made. So you need to know the specifics of the patient, you need to know the specifics of the epilepsy you are dealing with, then you will be able to choose the medication rightly. The simplistic model many of the physicians and pediatricians have is like any seizure in a child, you start with any medications that will take care of itself. That is a very simplistic model that doesn't work. For achieving seizure control, for precision treatment, what we call, to individualize the treatment plan, we need to go into the in-depths of the history, the type of epilepsy, the etiology, the patient characteristics and comorbidities. Then we combine everything together to arrive at which medication will be useful. For some epilepsies, some medications are very effective. I'll show you the examples. So this is the individualized tailor-made approach. For epilepsy, there are various different treatment options available. Anti-epileptic medications are the single most first choice of treatment we start with. Once the patients are drug refractory, drug resistant, even after giving few anti-epileptic medications, then we think about other options, including ketogenic diet or epilepsy surgery or other options like vagus nerve stimulation and deep brain stimulation. These are less commonly used. All the patients first go through anti-epileptic medications. So this chart shows you from the first anti-epileptic medication that was discovered, bromide, in the 19th century. Many decades later, phenobarbital and phenytoin. So the first generation anti-epileptic medications and the second generation anti-epileptic medications are known as older anti-epileptic medications. The cutoff point taken is 1993. After 1993, whatever the medications that came into market, these are all the exponential increase that came into the market after 1993 are taken as third generation anti-epileptic medications or anti-seizure medications, and that's what called newer anti-epileptic drugs. So by standard older anti-epileptic medication, we mean phenytoin, phenobarbital, carbamazepine, and valproate. Newer anti-epileptic medication, everything else. The most commonly used are levetiracetam, lamotrigine, oxcarbazepine, lacosamide, zonisamide, and topiramate. These are the commonly used newer anti-epileptic medications. So how to choose? We have so many medications available. We are at times spoiled for the choice. How to choose? So as I previously alluded to, we look at the variables, AED specific variable, the seizure type, epilepsy syndrome type, like epilepsy syndrome, the Wester syndrome, the childhood absence epilepsy, benign Rolandic epilepsy. These are the epilepsy syndromes. So you look at the seizure type, focal seizure, epilepsy type, benign Rolandic epilepsy. Then you look at the other patient-specific variables and cost and availability. That is another very important parameter when we look at the anti-epileptic medication choice. So when coming to principles of drug therapy in epilepsy, we always individualize the anti-epileptic prescription. There is no like single anti-epileptic medication will be, I'll use sodium valproate for everyone and it will work half the times. That approach is not correct. We need to individualize the anti-epileptic medication prescription to that particular child with that particular epilepsy syndrome. So we always start with one medication. It's not like your anti-tubercular therapy or any other therapy you at a time give 4 or 5 medications. We always start with the monotherapy, that is single drug. and start with a low dose always, and we gradually increase up titrate, and at some point the seizures stop, then we stop. This is a clinical titration. Always ensure compliance. Many a times you are giving a medication, patient comes back to you repeatedly saying, I have the episode, I had just had the episode this morning, I just had the episode yesterday, without ensuring that the patient is taking the medication correctly in a correct dose what was prescribed. Please do not go on hiking the dose. Many times the most common cause for breakthrough seizures are non-compliance. Increase the dose gradually to achieve the maximum tolerated dose, and we always have to identify comorbid mood and anxiety disorders. I'll come to that in a minute, because many of the antiepileptic medications can cause behavioral issues in children and worsen the anxiety, worsen the mood, and it can cause a lot of trouble. So that you need to keep in mind. So these are the basic principles of antiepileptic medication therapy in epilepsy. This adage of as much as needed, but it's only as little as possible. It's literally, it is easy to conceive. So you have to give a antiepileptic medication only as much as needed, but you have to be careful enough to keep it as little as possible. Though it's self-evident, many times it is forgotten. When you are sitting in a clinic and the patient comes back to you repeatedly saying, I have a seizure, I have a seizure, the usual tendency is to increase the medication dose or add another medication, but that should be resisted. So what happens when a child is put on first antiepileptic medication? The medication can be partially effective, so the seizure frequency come down, seizures duration come down, but the patient is not completely seizure free. So that is partially effective. In that case, we will try to optimize the medication dose first. If the medication dose is already optimal, there are two options. One, you add another medication to the first one. So 1 + 1, second medication you can add. That is called add-on therapy. Or you gradually withdraw the first medication and introduce second medication, that is substitute monotherapy. On the other hand, if the first antiepileptic medication is not effective or there's intolerable side effects, so that case you definitely have to taper and stop the antiepileptic medication, the first one, and go for another medication, that is alternate monotherapy. So these are the options we have. So in any patient, so this is a landmark study in NEJM 2000. This basically is a population study of long-term seizure remission. So in this, what they found, only about 50% of the patients, including adults or children, 50% of the patients become seizure free with the first antiepileptic medication. So any child comes to you with a diagnosed epilepsy, you start a first anti-epileptic medication, you expect 50% of them will become seizure free. The remaining 50%, 13% will become seizure free with the addition of the second medication. First medication, add on second medication. So with the first and second medication, 47 + 13, 60%. 60% of patients will become seizure free. But once this 60% is done, the remaining 40% of the patients, whatever the medication we add, the seizure freedom rates are not that great. So less than 5% of them become seizure free. So this is called drug resistant epilepsy, when the correctly chosen appropriate antiepileptic medication, two different antiepileptic medication used in a combination or separate monotherapy trials in an adequate dosage for adequate duration, then you call it drug resistant epilepsy. So coming to the actual topic for the day. So the newer antiepileptic medications, efficacy wise, they are same as old antiepileptic medication. Many of you are very well versed with phenytoin, carbamazepine, phenobarbital, sodium valproate. These are the older medications. So they are very good. Efficacy wise, there is no problem. So the older medication and newer medications, the efficacy is the same. Many times we prefer newer antiepileptic medication because of their better safety profile. It is not for the efficacy, it's a better safety profile. Going back to that same slide, whether you are using older medication or newer antiepileptic medication, the seizure freedom rate will be 60% for two medications, 60%. But we have a very much better safety profile because we know these antiepileptic medications are given for years together, at least for 2 to 3 years. Many patients are on antiepileptic medications for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years also. So efficacy is important, but the safety profile, especially in a long-term cumulative safety profile, is very, very important. So that is why we prefer newer antiepileptic medication nowadays, because they have fewer side effects. More importantly, the drug interaction between the medications is very much less or minimal or none with the newer antiepileptic medication, especially when TB meningitis or tuberculoma. So you need to be on anti-tubercular treatment as well as anti-epileptic drug. So phenytoin is the bad choice, phenytoin or carbamazepine, because they are all enzyme inducers. Either your ATT will fail, or the other way around, the seizure freedom may not be there because of the interaction. So these are the situations we definitely need to go for some newer antiepileptic medication without any drug-drug interaction on liver enzymes. But the catch here is most of the newer antiepileptic medications are more expensive compared to the older ones. So we need to be using these medications very judiciously. The usual principle is you start with whenever a patient comes to you with epilepsy, usually the first medication to be started are usually the older medication like phenytoin or valproate, more common, phenytoin or valproate. Then once the patient is partially effective or not effective on that, then you can add another medication. That is usually the newer antiepileptic medication. So this is the one trade-off we have. As many of you would have experienced, sodium valproate is one of the most effective and the most important medication we use in pediatric epilepsy. Many of the pediatric epilepsy syndromes, pediatric epilepsy patients will respond very much to sodium valproate. So in those kind of cases, we start with sodium valproate. The moment it is only partially effective, then we add another medication, that is an add-on. Remember, all antiepileptic medications can cause behavioral side effects, as well as all antiepileptic medication can cause weight gain. The only exception for this rule are topiramate and zonisamide. Topiramate and zonisamide cause loss of appetite and loss of weight. Sometimes it can cause extreme anorexia also. So that is opposite end. Most of the other medication causes increased appetite and increased weight. Notoriously, clobazam, sodium valproate, these cause a lot of weight gain. So coming to AED choice by seizure type, so you need to have a very detailed history or home videos. Nowadays patients come with the smartphones, they have the seizure episode captured on the video. So that will be very, very useful for identifying the seizure type. So if it is a complex partial seizure or secondary generalized seizure, then you have many medication like carbamazepine, oxcarbazepine, phenytoin, levetiracetam. These are the commonly used medication for focal epilepsy. So simple partial seizure, complex partial seizure, secondary generalized seizure, these are focal epilepsy syndromes. Again, these are all old terminology, but because of the more familiarity for the physicians and pediatricians, I'm using the older terminology. For generalized onset seizures, always valproate is the best choice for pediatric epilepsy. With tonic-clonic seizure, tonic seizure, atonic seizure, or a static seizure, absence or myoclonic seizure, the valproate is the fulcrum of all these generalized onset seizures. And we know childhood absence epilepsy respond very well to ethosuximide. It's a very narrow spectrum antiepileptic medication. The last line here is valproate and zonisamide. Felbamate we don't use that much at all, so that is obsolete. So valproate and zonisamide, these are called broad spectrum antiepileptic medications. Broad spectrum, including myoclonic seizures. Topiramate, lamotrigine, again broad spectrum, but lamotrigine can worsen myoclonic seizures. Topiramate, phenobarbital may not be very effective for myoclonic seizures. So this is a broad spectrum anti-epileptic medication. They work in focal epilepsy as well as generalized onset epilepsy and across various different seizure types. You would have come across patients with 2 or 3 different seizure types together in the same patient. It's common to have development delayed children with tonic seizure as well as focal seizure as well as atypical absence seizure. So combination of 3 different seizure types in the same patient. So those kind of cases, you have to go for broad spectrum antiepileptic medication like valproate. So this list here tells you what are the medications used for different epilepsy syndromes. So lamotrigine is very useful for focal epilepsy when they are resistant. We usually do not start lamotrigine as a monotherapy in most of the patients. We always add on with lamotrigine when the first or second medication have already failed. So Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, generalized tonic-clonic seizures, absence epilepsy, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, with the catch that some patients, the myoclonic seizures can worsen on lamotrigine. We have to be careful. And the refractory infantile spasms, once we have done your prednisolone, ACTH, or vigabatrin, then when they become refractory, lamotrigine is one of the very important medication there. Topiramate, again, most of the same indications. So we already discussed lamotrigine, topiramate can be broad spectrum. Ticagrelor we don't use. Vigabatrin, you all know. All of us know vigabatrin should be used for infantile spasms when it does not respond to steroids. But vigabatrin can be used for partial onset seizures also, the focal epilepsy also, especially in the setting of focal cortical dysplasia or tuberous sclerosis. So tuberous sclerosis with focal seizures, vigabatrin is one of the very good choice. Oxcarbazepine, carbamazepine and oxcarbazepine are related medication, same group. So it's the same indication as carbamazepine. So focal onset epilepsy, oxcarbazepine or carbamazepine are the first drug of choice. Zonisamide is a broad spectrum antiepileptic medication, so you can use in many different syndromes, including very important infantile spasm that are refractory as well as drop attacks, secondary generalized seizures. So zonisamide is very important. Coming to a little bit more in detail, clobazam. Clobazam is one of the most commonly used first add-on medication. So whenever we started a patient with, in a case of focal epilepsy, oxcarbazepine or carbamazepine, when it fails or only partially effective, then we add on clobazam. In a patient with very frequent nocturnal seizures, in minority of patients with benign Rolandic epilepsy, you would have already started them on either carbamazepine or valproate. When they are not responding fully, clobazam can be a very good addition. So clobazam is the most commonly used first add-on medication, and it's very effective in many situations. Many pediatricians have this misconception about clobazam should be used only intermittently. That comes from your intermittent febrile seizure prophylaxis. When we write clobazam 1 tablet at night daily, many pediatricians for 3 months or 6 months or 4 months like that, prescription for stable epilepsy, many pediatricians get worried why this medication has been used for long term. It should be used only for few days. That's a misconception. Clobazam is like any other antiepileptic medication, and you can use it for months and years. And there are many studies in pediatric population. It is safe to be used in a long-term continuous therapy. So the notion of clobazam should be used only in intermittent prophylaxis is not true. Lamotrigine, the main problem with lamotrigine can be, and many neurologists, many pediatric neurologists are very skeptical or wary about these medications, because if you are not careful enough to titrate lamotrigine slowly, especially when the patient is already on sodium valproate, there can be a bad skin hypersensitivity rashes, including Stevens-Johnson syndrome can happen. But having used lamotrigine in hundreds of pediatric age group patients with refractory epilepsy, by deliberately slow titration, we use a very small dose initially, and every 10 days or 2 weeks, every 2 weeks only we hike the dose. With that kind of a strategy, we have never come across Stevens-Johnson syndrome in those patients that till now we have in our team, in our hospital, we have started with the lamotrigine. So it can be a very effective medication, but we need to use it carefully. So this can be add-on for idiopathic generalized epilepsy, childhood absence epilepsy, juvenile absence epilepsy, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. The combination of sodium valproate and lamotrigine is very, very, very good. So absence seizures, I have a case scenario I'll explain. The refractory absence epilepsy, lamotrigine is the drug of choice. Focal epilepsy, again, lamotrigine has a very good control. We have many patients who already tried on many medications without a complete seizure freedom. But the moment you started with lamotrigine, after 2 to 3 months of gradual titration, up titration, the patient have become completely seizure free for many years. To the extent lamotrigine can be at some point kept as a monotherapy after initially trying with other medication, and you can taper and stop the medication. Coming to topiramate and zonisamide, these are two related medications. Both work through carbonic anhydrase enzyme system inhibition. So the topiramate can be very effective, especially in infants, flurry of focal seizure that are not responsive to your usual medication. The topiramate is one of the fulcrum of treatment in infants with refractory epilepsy. Can be titrated quickly as against the previous medication, lamotrigine, what we discussed. This can be given very quickly. But the problem with these topiramate is speech delay can be there. Speech, cognition, and memory deficits can be a problem. Especially this happens especially in an older child or young adults or adults. In a very young child, this is usually not a problem, but you have to be careful about it. The risk of renal calculi is very important. You always have to advise any patient you are starting on topiramate and zonisamide to drink a lot of liquids to avoid this renal calculi issue. And the incidence of renal calculi is less than 5%, and even if it is there, it will be usually small and usually reversible after you stop the medication. We don't do routine ultrasound or any other investigation to monitor this, but this should be explained to the parents. Another troublesome adverse effects with topiramate can be hypohidrosis, that is no or lack of sweating, that causes body warmth. Many times, especially in a very hot summer months in our country, patients can get flushes, a warm body warmth that can be mistaken for fever. So again, you should inform the parents and warn them about this body warmth should not be taken as fever. The best way to manage that, if it is there, is to avoid going out in the hot sun and to give some tepid sponging, keep the patient in a well ventilated rooms. So these are the usual, and these are usually effective. Zonisamide is very effective in drop attacks and the refractory infantile spasms we already mentioned. Again, renal calculi can be a problem, so plenty of liquids should be advised. Coming to one of the most commonly used antiepileptic medication in the pediatric practice, levetiracetam. This is more famous or mostly preferred by many pediatricians because it doesn't have serious adverse effects. It can cause worsening of behavior, especially a child with developmental delay, child with pre-existing hyperactivity, child with autism. Knowingly, in these patients, we would definitely avoid giving them levetiracetam, because if you start patient with hyperactivity, patient with existing behavioral problems, patient with autism on levetiracetam, you are definitely inviting trouble. So these patients do not tolerate levetiracetam because their behavior can go completely off with even few days of levetiracetam therapy. So you have to avoid in these situations. And this is used mainly in generalized epilepsy, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, especially women of childbearing age like adolescents or young adult women, because valproate associated teratogenicity is a major problem. So this is levetiracetam is used instead of valproate for juvenile myoclonic epilepsy in women, adolescents, teenager girls, and young women. Levetiracetam has been recently used more and more in neonatal ICUs for neonatal seizures, because there is no sedation or respiratory depression that you will come across with phenobarbital. So you can avoid that and maybe avoid ventilation for some of the patients. So levetiracetam can be used as loading dose as well as maintenance dose for neonates and infants with seizures and epilepsy. Another newer antiepileptic medication is lacosamide. This is last few years has been marketed in India. Recently, there is a liquid preparation also available. Previously, it used to be 50 milligram, 100 milligram tablets only available. But recently, one company has already come with lacosamide syrup. Another company is going to market it in a few months. So this is more and more used in children. This is FDA approved more than 4 years old children. But there's a data coming in with even more than 2-year-old children, especially lacosamide injectable preparation is available. Lacosamide can be given as a loading dose for refractory status epilepticus once you have usual IV fosphenytoin or phenytoin, IV valproate, phenobarbital, levetiracetam, all four are already exhausted. Still, the patient has a refractory status epilepticus. We prefer to give lacosamide as a IV loading followed by maintenance therapy, and it can be used for long run. So the doses of lacosamide, zonisamide, topiramate, and phenytoin are same. mg per kg, you will usually start with 2 to 3 milligram per kilo per day. All the four medications: phenytoin, lacosamide, topiramate, zonisamide. All these are started as 2 to 3 milligram per kilo per day, and you gradually up titrate. You go up to 8 milligram per kilo per day. So these are usual comparable doses. Again, this can be used as a monotherapy for focal epilepsy or add-on therapy for refractory focal epilepsy. And the side effect profile is very safe. Not a major side effects are there, even though theoretical adverse effects like QT prolongation or PR interval prolongation, heart block are known theoretically, but practically it's not common at all. But anyway, we give IV loading of lacosamide under ECG monitoring only always because of this side effect. But practically we never come across these. So there are some 3 newest antiepileptic medications marketed in the last couple of years. The brivaracetam, still these are newer medications, so there are only one innovator molecule available in the market. So brivaracetam and perampanel have been marketed for last couple of years in India. The Epidiolex CBD cannabis not available in India, but Epidiolex is approved by FDA for drug refractory epilepsy, including Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, Dravet syndrome, like severe epilepsies. But it's not available yet in India. This is a capsule. This is a synthetic molecule, not taken directly from the plant, but it's a synthetic molecule. But what is available more widely is the CBD oil, what is called the CBD oil. Basically, that is a very crude plant product, edible oil and a dried plant. So this is one of the manufacturing forms in the US. So we have to be beware of this. The Epidiolex is a synthetic material capsule that is FDA approved, not these any CBD oil. Coming to adverse effects, we already discussed most of these adverse effects under each medication. So we need to be very, very careful about these adverse effects whenever we use this medication. We should warn the parents and we should discuss with them when we are starting the medication. So this chart gives you for which epilepsy type, which are the first choice, second choice, third choice medication. For a focal epilepsy, we always start with carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine, that is the drug of choice. Phenytoin can be a good alternative. Second choice medications are lamotrigine, topiramate, valproate. Other choices can be zonisamide and other medication. Generalized tonic-clonic seizure, as I told you, valproate is the drug of choice, but other medications can be used. For absent seizures, ethosuximide is the first drug of choice. Valproate can be another common medication. Ethosuximide was till recently was not available in India, so we always used to use sodium valproate for any childhood absence epilepsy, juvenile absence epilepsy. But last more than 1 year, ethosuximide syrup formulation is available in India. It's called, there's only one company that markets ethosuximide, so that can be used. So this is one guideline. This is not a complete exhaustive list. So after discussing so much for different seizure types, different epilepsies, neonatal seizures, we still use a lot of phenobarbital and phenytoin, but it should not be continued for years together. It should be used only for short term in the neonatal age group. Levetiracetam can be very good alternative. Infantile spasms, we know prednisolone or ACTH or vigabatrin can be the first drug of choice. Benign focal epilepsy, benign Rolandic epilepsy, many times we may not treat because these are infrequent, brief, nocturnal seizures. If you have to use, valproate is a very good medication. Carbamazepine can be used, but some patients can worsen on carbamazepine. Benign Rolandic epilepsy can worsen on carbamazepine. So many times we directly use sodium valproate and clobazam combination if the patient has a very problematic frequency issues. Absence epilepsy, valproate and ethosuximide. Juvenile myoclonic epilepsy in boys, valproate is the drug of choice, but in girls, we try to avoid valproate. Girls above 8 to 10 years, we avoid valproate because of the PCOD syndrome, because of the risk of teenage pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies, and tetrodotoxicity. Focal epilepsy, as we already discussed, is always carbazepine or oxcarbazepine. So coming to polytherapy, once your first and second medications have failed, that is the time you think about using a combination of medications. That is called polytherapy. So we have to combine medications that have different mechanism of action. Some medications are sodium channel blockers, other medications are GABAergic or other channels. So we should not combine usually two sodium channel blockers together, like using phenytoin and carbamazepine. It's not a good combination because both are sodium channel blockers and both can induce one another's metabolism. So it's a very messy combination. So we usually don't use carbamazepine and phenytoin together. And we have to have a complex. The medication used in combination should not have interactions, should not have a similar side effect profile because the side effects can be additive. I already discussed that topiramate and zonisamide are the similar group, similar mechanism of action. So we never combine topiramate and zonisamide together because it will add to the side effects. It will add to the risk of renal calculi. It will add to the risk of metabolic acidosis because carbonic anhydrase inhibitor is the mechanism of action. So we never combine topiramate and zonisamide together in a patient. So that is what is meant by similar adverse effect. And the doses should be in a minimum when you are using a combination. Say for example, valproate, we always say you can go up to 40 to 60 milligram per kilo per day. But the same valproate, when you are in a combination of 3 or 4 medications, we try to use 30, 35, 40. We don't go beyond that when you are in a combination. So you need to use minimum doses possible. That is the advantage of combination. You can use minimal dosage and get away with without having adverse effects. So we try 2 different monotherapy, then go for polytherapy. Minimum effective dose should be used and use least number of drugs. There are patients that come to us with epilepsy and the prescription already you can see 6 or 7 or 8 antiepileptic medications together. That's not usually what we mean by polytherapy combination. We usually try to achieve 3, ideally 2 medication combination, 2 medications, or at the max 3 antiepileptic medication combination. That's what is a polytherapy. So always you have to taper off the ineffective antiepileptic medication. What you think is the ineffective antiepileptic medication for that particular patient. We should not go on adding. That will lead to multiple medications. So this is very important slide. So when you are in a monotherapy, you still have a 20% of chance of having adverse effects. But when you are combining different medication in polytherapy, that adverse effects incidence and prevalence go up to 3 times higher than the monotherapy. So up to 60% of patients, usual adverse effects are dullness, cognitive side effects, memory problems, cannot retain what they have learned in the school, and drowsiness. These are the common side effects. So this is the flow chart. How we usually go. So initial monotherapy, first medication, and second drug you can go. And when the drug refractory epilepsy criteria is fulfilled, you have to definitely go for video EEG and look at whether this is surgically remediable syndrome, and then you can use additional polytherapy and other options as patient warrants. So some of the anti-epileptic medication combinations can be very synergistic. The examples are sodium valproate and lamotrigine is very effective combination for many of the generalized epilepsy syndromes. Valproate, topiramate, and clobazam combination is very good in Dravet syndrome, generalized epilepsy with Febrile seizure plus. In Dravet syndrome, you would have had infants or toddlers coming to you with the recurrent status epilepticus requiring admission. Recurrent status epilepticus, prolonged status epilepticus, half an hour, 1 hour, requiring mechanical ventilation, and monthly they can have at a height of at the peak of their worst epilepsy. So this combination of valproate, topiramate, and clobazam will are effective in many of the patients to prevent these recurrent admissions, recurrent status epilepticus in these patients. It's a very important combination to remember. Oxcarbazepine and topiramate is very good combination for focal epilepsy. Oxcarbazepine and clobazam is very effective combination for focal cortical dysplasia, nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy. These are very so you need to identify the etiology, you need to identify the epilepsy syndrome for you to identify which combination of antiepileptic medications will work better for your patient. This is what is the tailor-made approach. This is what is the precision treatment, what we talk about all the time in the epilepsy treatment. So coming to some case scenarios, this is a 11-year-old boy presented with multiple nightly episodes of bizarre behavior, vocalization and thrashing of the limbs, brief episodes lasting for 30 seconds, 7 to 8 times every night he used to have for last 2 months, never had any other generalized tonic-clonic seizures. He was completely normal developmentally before these episodes, but in the last 2 months his behavior worsened, school performance nosedived, and hyperactive. He became angry and aggressive. So his EEG showed right frontal spikes and MRI was completely normal, and he was treated in another hospital. He was on valproate and levetiracetam combination when he came to us. So few pointers here. So first, the nightly nocturnal seizures. So the nocturnal seizures are the way we have described here, the bizarre behavior, vocalization, very hyperactive thrashing of the limbs. These are usually focal epilepsy, focal seizures, usually frontal lobe epilepsy. So these are called nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy, and the EEG gives you the clue, right frontal spikes are seen. That's what you would expect for this kind of a description. So this is a nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy, right? So that is the syndromic diagnosis. So you need to have a precise diagnosis for you to choose your antiepileptic medication rightly. That's what not happened in the previous treatment. Because valproate is not the medication of choice for nocturnal frontal lobe epilepsy or any focal epilepsy for that matter. It's not the first line of medication. And levetiracetam, already his behavior was worse in the last 2 months. The addition of levetiracetam did not help that. It actually worsened the behavior further. So we identified the epileptic syndrome and we started with oxcarbazepine, and the valproate and levetiracetam were stopped next 2 weeks, and oxcarbazepine was started that showed partial response. So the moment that showed partial response, we started with clobazam also. So the combination of oxcarbazepine and clobazam, he remained completely seizure free for 3 years. The recent story is he was on a he is a 11-year-old child, right? He was on a 5 milligram clobazam half tablet at night. 5 milligram tablet, half tablet at night, once a day. So after 3 years of seizure freedom, we tried to taper that half tablet and stop. The moment we stopped, he started having that nocturnal episodes again. For 3 years, he was completely seizure free. The moment you stop that very small dose of half a tablet of 5 milligram clobazam in an older child, the moment you stop that, he then restarted the same medication, now doing very well. So even though the medications are so small, what we used to call homeopathic doses, even then for some patients, these small doses of medications can be very effective. So that is the learning. Going to the second case, this is a 5-month-old infant presented with 5 episodes of seizures in the last 2 months. Now developmentally normal child, no perinatal risk factors. MRI brain was normal, metabolic workup was normal. He was on phenytoin, phenobarbital, levetiracetam, and clonazepam when he came to us. So this is the usual combination of medication you will expect in an infant. So, but this was not working. Still, he was having seizures. So, what we did, we added topiramate because all these medications have already been used, and this is a 5-month-old child. Even though these are focal seizures, oxcarbazepine, carbazepine in this age group can be a little bit difficult in infancy. So same way, phenytoin, giving phenytoin in a therapeutic dose in these very small infants is problematic. Usually these are fast metabolizers with erratic drug levels. So phenytoin is not very good option for these infants because you cannot maintain the drug level. So we added topiramate, and other antiepileptic medications have been slowly tapered. So completely seizure free for more than 3 years, but he was only on a small dose of topiramate monotherapy for last 3 years. But again, this child recently, 2 months back, I tapered and stopped. Okay, anyway, he's completely normal developing child. never had seizures after starting topiramate. But the moment we stopped topiramate, he had many seizures in the last couple of months. Again, we restarted topiramate, that did not work. Then we restarted him on a combination of topiramate, clobazam, and phenytoin. So seizure recurrence can be a problem even after years of seizure freedom. So that is the message here. So this child had 5 episodes of seizures in 2 months, and you're given topiramate, one medication, and 3 years he has not had any seizures. The moment you stop the medication, he started having recurrence of seizures. So the medication was very effective for him. It's not just a chance that he did not have seizures for last 3 years. Going to another case, this is a 9-year-old boy, known case of autism, had 2 recent seizures in the last 2 months. Again, treated by one of my colleagues. He was started on levetiracetam. So knowing fully autism and recent history of seizures, this was a focal epilepsy, awake seizures, secondary generalized seizures. Levetiracetam may not be a good choice for this scenario. So what happened after starting levetiracetam? Within 3 or 4 days, he became very violent, aggressive, shouting and crying and running amok and hitting self-harm as well as hitting others. So he could not be managed at all. So the levetiracetam was stopped immediately and behavior much better. The seizures were controlled with valproate. So valproate has a secondary mood stabilizing effect also. Valproate per se can cause behavior problem. Mind you, any antiepileptic medication for that matter can give rise to behavior problem. But in this scenario of autism, levetiracetam is very notorious. So valproate or oxcarbazepine can be useful as a mood stabilizer also. Psychiatrists always use these medication for mood stability, but the doses used for mood stabilization is higher dose. So what we use for seizure control is a lower dose. So that's it. Coming to another case, this is a 6-year-old girl with a severe global developmental delay. She's completely bedridden and wheelchair bound, had multiple daily seizures since infancy. Extensive workup has been done, and including genetic panels, everything was negative. So we don't know the etiology, though it appears like she has a genetic epileptic encephalopathy, but possibly it is not one of those known genes. So she was on a combination, very odd combination of topiramate, zonisamide, and because she was on these 2 medication of full dose of topiramate and zonisamide, obviously she had metabolic acidosis. So she was given soda bicarb daily for this acidosis. So topiramate and zonisamide combination should not be used together, but this child was on when she came to us, and she was on clobazam, she was on diamox. So that is again adds to this combination. So all these are carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, diamox, zonisamide, and topiramate. That's why she was on soda bicarb. How you use soda bicarb for CKD patients, chronic kidney disease patients. She was on that daily, and she was on CBD oil also. The parents would go online and procure this CBD oil, the cannabis oil from North America, and she was on all these different combinations. No wonder she was very dull and sleepy the whole day. So what we did 24-hour video EEG, and that gave us a very surprising results. What mother was calling daily seizures were actually not seizures, because she's a severe global developmental delay child with a wheelchair bound. So she was doing different stereotypies, different movements. So mother was overcalling these as seizures, but these are not seizures. To her surprise, she had subtle seizures or electrographic seizures that were not recognized at all. So it's a conundrum. The actual seizures were not recognized. The non-epileptic movements were treated as seizures. So we clarified this with sitting by the side of the child and mother, and we showed the videos. See, these are seizures, these are not seizures. So that very important. That's why it's a goal setting. So you need to identify what are the seizures you are treating. So just a parental report, you cannot go on treating with, especially the medications like CBD oil and the zonisamide and all those high-end versions, right? So obviously the CBD oil was stopped, topiramate was stopped. She was managed with valproate, zonisamide was continued, lamotrigine and clobazam, this combination, because these electrographic and subtle seizures were really resistant, and she had a very active EEG. So it was a epileptic encephalopathy. So she was on 4 anti-epileptic medications. Case 5, 10-year-old boy with absent seizures. He would have multiple daily absences, started from 9 years of age with perioral myoclonus and arm myoclonus. During the absence, he will have myoclonic jerks. So this he had multiple daily. When he came to me first time in the OPD in the clinic, within the 20 minutes of the consultation, he had at least 7 episodes of these, and these are very dramatic myoclonic jerks. So he was on valproate, but that was not fully effective. So what we did, we added a small dose of lamotrigine. Lamotrigine comes as a 25 milligram tablet. He is a 10-year-old child. So for him, 25 milligram tablet, initially we gave half tablet once a day, and then we gave 25 milligram in the morning. That's how we use lamotrigine. We give, especially when in the combination of valproate, we give lamotrigine as a single daily dose, usually in the morning. Lamotrigine and levetiracetam or alerting medications, they can interfere with sleep, should not be used usually at night. Even if you are using the evening dose, better to give before 7 p.m. because that can disturb the sleep onset, because these are alerting medication opposite to drowsiness. So this child is completely seizure free with the lamotrigine small dose and valproate. So this is what happens in a refractory absence seizures. So you can use this combination for these patients. This is another child, 9-year-old, completely normal child, perinatal and no antecedents, normal developmentally, class 3 student, presented with explosive onset of multiple daily seizures, predominantly in sleep in the last week of September 2000. Sorry, this is 2018. September 2018. Failed 3 medications in another hospital. MRI brain was normal twice, including 3 Tesla MRI. And her seizures were very vague, cephalic sensation, followed by fear, screaming, head version to the left side, and then she would hold on to her parents. So she was aware during this seizure and prompt recovery and no postictal confusion. So these were focal seizures, these were frontal focal seizures, and the EEG showed right frontocentral discharges. These are the right frontocentral discharges with bilateral field. And these were the seizures. What we recorded multiple seizures overnight. At some point, she had 20 seizures per day, 20 seizures every day. And some of the seizures compromised her respiration and caused cyanosis and desaturation. There's another seizure from sleep. So you can see the diffuse onset of seizures. She was tried on all these different medications as an inpatient because she was having so many seizures, 20, 30 seizures per day. So all the antiepileptic medications have been used desperately. We've used some of the medications also, including IV methylprednisolone pulse that is used sometimes in acute setting with the flurry of seizures. That was just empirical treatment. Autoimmune and every other workup was negative, so etiology was unknown. And because it's all coming from one right frontal lobe, we discussed about the surgery, and even though MRI was normal, we had a chance that possibly we can do an invasive EEG and we can make her seizure free, but family was very reluctant to undergo surgery at all. So she had severe behavioral issues. This is one of the features of frontal lobe, because frontal lobe is the executive function, and frontal lobe problems can cause a lot of behavior. So she had behavior issues to the extent she would at times she would self-harm, pinch, bite herself, bite her mother, and hit her younger brother. And sometimes she passed urine in the middle of the house, middle of the living room. So these are the severe behavior issues she had. So she was not attending school at all for many months because of the falling attacks and behavior issues. At that time, Briviact was the newer medication, brivaracetam, that has just come into market. Even though this is at that time it should be used for more than a 12-year-old child. So she was 9-year-old. So desperately we wanted some answers. So we started her on Briviact. She had a partial response for the first time of all the medications used. And along with that, we used a combination of brivaracetam and zonisamide, and all the medications are tapered. At one point, she was on 60 milligram of phenobarbital. That was all tapered and stopped. Currently, she is only on brivaracetam and zonisamide, completely seizure-free for more than 15 months now, and attending school. That is the most important point. She doesn't have any of those behavioral issues, and she's back in school and behavior cognition normal. The importance of this story is, even after trying and failing so many different medications, for a given patient, there can be one medication that can be effective. So that makes the difference between a seizure and seizure control. So you need to treat, as many of you know, the treatment of epilepsy is a trial and error method, and we would go through the initial medications, and so that is addition of newer medications can be addition of another weapon in your armamentarium. So that's what happened to this girl, and she's completely normal now. To conclude, epilepsy treatment is tailor-made. Choosing a right anti-epileptic medication for the patient is an art as well as science. Rational polytherapy has a role in drug-resistant epilepsy. Many recent developments have been there. Keeping pace sometimes may not be possible, but these kind of webinars and discussions and teaching is for many of you pediatricians and physicians to keep pace with these developments. Many of these medications to come into textbook, the brivaracetam, the perampanel, the CBD, the Epidiolex, to come into textbooks will take another 5 years. Okay, but we cannot wait for that. You know this girl's story, so you need to know these recent developments so that our patients get benefited. So whenever you come across a difficult to treat epilepsy patient, obviously you have to get a pediatric neurologist consult. So please refer and consult early whenever required. I'll conclude here, and if there are questions, we will take. So can you expand this? Can we get the questions? Yes, I think quite a few questions are there. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to cover all of these. Yeah, so we'll try to do take common questions in the next 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. Which is the best injectable AED in a child with respiratory distress, minimal respiratory suppression? Okay, phenytoin usually doesn't cause respiratory suppression. The most important medication that causes respiratory suppression in a acute setting, acute symptomatic seizure or status epilepticus or benzodiazepines, the midazolam especially. Lorazepam has a less respiratory depression side effect, but it albeit has anyway. And the combination of phenobarbital and 2 or 3 doses of midazolam or lorazepam, that is definitely a problem. If you are using 20 milligram per kilo or loading dose of phenobarbital and midazolam or midazolam infusion, definitely that causes respiratory depression. Phenytoin per se doesn't cause respiratory depression. It can cause hypotension, it can cause asystole, it can cause arrhythmia, but phenytoin doesn't cause respiratory depression. So phenytoin is a very good molecule for that. And levetiracetam can be IV can be used, that doesn't cause respiratory depression. Lacosamide IV loading can be used, that again doesn't cause respiratory depression. Valproate, so sodium valproate IV can be used, that also again doesn't cause respiratory depression. When do we use lacosamide? Lacosamide can be used for focal epilepsy as a first drug in older child. So monotherapy is possible, or refractory focal epilepsy we can use. Refractory status epilepticus we can use IV lacosamide. Absence epilepsy not responding to ethosuximide. Yeah, absence epilepsy not responding to ethosuximide is a minority of patients are there like that, and we switch over to sodium valproate. There are patients, they failed ethosuximide. The moment you put them on sodium valproate, they become completely free of absences. So that is one type. There are other patients, they need a combination of ethosuximide and valproate. Then they become seizure free. That is another subset. There are rare subset of patients with refractory absence epilepsy. They need a combination of small doses of all the 3 medications: sodium valproate, ethosuximide, and a small dose of lamotrigine. All the 3 in a combination causes seizure freedom in refractory absence epilepsy. When you come across refractory absence epilepsy, especially in a young child, early onset abscess, before 4 years of age, you need to think about metabolic syndrome like a GLUT1 deficiency that can be a cause for refractory absence epilepsy. In that scenario, ketogenic diet will be the treatment of choice rather than going through anti-epileptic medications. Which drug should not be combined with lamotrigine? Carbamazepine and lamotrigine can be a problem because the drug level interaction. So the moment you add carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine to a patient with lamotrigine, that can cause toxicity and problem. Otherwise, lamotrigine can be quite easily combined with all other medications. Which newer AD are prone for tachyphylaxis? We usually don't come across this phenomena in a clinical setting, away from the midazolam infusion for midazolam coma or thiopentone coma for refractory status epilepticus. The tachyphylaxis in a chronic stable epilepsy is usually not there. Basically, the patients, you are giving medication and the patients are getting seizures. Initially, 3 months, there is a honeymoon effect. In a drug-resistant epilepsy, any medication you introduce, first 2 to 3 months, they will do well. After that, again, the seizure frequency comes back to the baseline. That is not tachyphylaxis. That is the initial, whatever you can call it, the initial honeymoon period or initial effect, non-specific or initial placebo effect. We don't know. That happens. That is very well known, but that's not tachyphylaxis. You have mentioned use of oxcarbazepine in GTCS. Flowchart, can we use it for the indication? Yeah, that depends on what GTCS. GTCS is a very, I don't prefer that uh, reference to GTCS. Many times pediatricians, especially the youngsters, they use GTCS seizures very indiscriminately. To the extent many times the PGs tell us this GTCS, I go and take a detailed history from the parents. To my surprise, the patient never had stiffening, never had a clonic jerking, but the youngster was calling that as a GTC seizure. So we have to be very careful in what we call which as a GTC seizure. So the generalized tonic-clonic seizure can be of two types. One, a focal seizure going into secondary generalization, or IgE syndrome, generalized tonic-clonic seizure alone as a single manifestation. Definitely IgE syndrome with like juvenile absence epilepsy or juvenile myoclonic epilepsy with generalized tonic-clonic seizures, oxcarbazepine or carbazepine is not to be used. But for focal epilepsy with the secondary generalized seizures, that is also GTCS, secondary generalized seizures, the oxcarbazepine is the drug of choice. Having said that, many patients with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy or idiopathic generalized epilepsy where we think oxcarbazepine should not be used, many patients are on that and they are under control for many years. So it's not a single hard and fast rule. But knowing fully that this is a juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, we wouldn't use oxcarbazepine as a medication. Partially controlled, how we can decide as second drug or frequent. These are a bit arbitrary decisions and these are subjective, and that's where your experience that comes in. So it is not purely science, it's a lot of art also. EEG facility not available in a small town. Yeah, rather than EEG facility not being available, many times EEGs are reported by adult neurologists, and many times you will get abnormal reports that may not be abnormal. So you need to be really careful about what EEGs you are getting. So that can be a problem in many of the settings. Role of adding vitamin D with AED. Yeah, that's a very good question, very important question. Especially when you are using valproate, phenytoin, or oxcarbazepine or carbamazepine, these are the enzyme inducers. So these can definitely interfere with bone mineral density in the long run, because these patients are going to be on the medications for 2, 3, 4 years. So definitely, yes, we check vitamin D and we give monthly vitamin D doses. Daily calcium and vitamin D can be a option, but better to give monthly vitamin D doses, especially if vitamin D is deficient. And 70% of our kids are vitamin D deficient. Which AED combinations are antagonistic? See, more than antagonistic, it's about intolerable side effects and interactions. That's why we are skeptical about some of the combinations. It's not antagonistic as such. So the combination of phenytoin and carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine is not good. I gave you a classical example of topiramate and zonisamide that should not be used together. And apart from that, many different medications can be used. That's okay. There is no antagonistic as such. Having said that, there are some anti-epileptic medications that has pro-convulsive effects. Many of the anti-epileptic medications have pro-convulsive effects, but it is a bit tricky to, when you're adding a medication, when the epilepsy is such that the patient has a frequent seizure despite your medication, when do you call it a pro-convulsant and when do you call it anti-epileptic induced seizure? That's a bit tricky, and that kind of decision should be made by a person who is very well experienced with the treatment of epilepsy and difficult to treat epilepsy. So that decision should not be made very easily, and that pro-convulsion effect of anti-epileptic medications are rare. Fortunately, they are rare. That's not a common scenario. Tevitrastan, phenobarbital, which is to be preferred in neonatal. I discussed that extensively. So anything can be used, but depending on what you're looking at, already the neonate is depressed, drowsy, and respiratory distress is there, on the verge of going into CPAP or ventilation. So better to avoid phenobarbital. So that can just by avoiding phenobarbital, you can avoid invasive intubation and ventilation. So that is very important. Okay, intracranial granuloma, you can use any medication. You can use phenytoin, very commonly used. You can use carbamazepine. Many patients are controlled with valproate also. So these are the three medications commonly used for neurocysticercosis or intracranial granuloma. Valproate can be started at what pediatric age? Again, that depends on your experience, depends on your patient population. We have used sodium valproate safely in many of the infants also. But having said that, you need to be very careful about patients suspected having metabolic syndrome, metabolic etiology. So valproate should be avoided in that. Apart from that, valproate can be used quite safely in infants as young as 3 or 4 or 5 months old. So we can use valproate, but you have to be careful in a developmental delayed children with possible metabolic etiology, especially suspected mitochondrial disorder or urea cycle disorder. Sodium valproate should be avoided. Okay, what is the treatment of lamotrigine rash? Yeah, like if it is a Stevens-Johnson syndrome, you have to go through the whole protocol of how you treat the extensive rashes of 10 or Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Apart from that, you obviously have to stop the medication for hypersensitivity reaction. There is no specific treatment as such. How glucocorticoids acts as anti-epileptic, that is still not known. So steroid, ACTH for West syndrome and other epilepsies, still the exact mechanism of action is not known. There are many theories, so it may not be true. Does normalization of previously abnormal EEG prerequisite to AED withdrawal? Yes, of course, because as I described in 2 of my cases, like they have been on small doses and they have been seizure free for 3 years. Even then, after stopping the medication, both had recurrences. So after withdrawal of antiepileptic medication, the recurrence risk is real. Some epilepsies depends on the etiology and the epilepsy syndrome. If it is a juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, there is a 80% chance that your drug withdrawal will fail. So most of the young adults or adults with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, they are on medication for many decades together. Small dose of valproate, but they are on for longer time. So depends on the etiology, depends on the epilepsy type. So there is a risk of recurrence. So we discuss this always with the parents. Like there is a 10% risk of seizure recurrence, there is a 30% seizure recurrence, especially those developmental delayed children with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. Those patients will never become completely seizure free without medications. So you need to be at least on 1 or 2 small doses of medication that need to be continued. Definitely, if the initial EEG was abnormal, say for example, childhood absence epilepsy or any other focal epilepsy, if the initial EEG was abnormal, definitely you will get a EEG before withdrawal, and you want to see whether that is abnormality has subsided. That is important. But there are a lot of interpretation problems in the EEG, a lot of pitfalls, because you're going to record the EEG for half an hour. The discharge may not come at that time. It may become infrequent with treatment. So with a caveat, we can definitely do the EEG, and if the EEG is completely normal, especially a well-taken EEG for at least 1 hour, the discharges were not there previously, the frequent discharges, definitely the risk of recurrence will be less. And at the same time, the repeat EEG showed discharges, you will not withdraw the medication for them. There are exceptions for this rule. Benign Rolandic epilepsy is a classical example. Benign Rolandic epilepsy, even though clinical remission has been achieved, the EEG remission takes time. So by the time the patient becomes pubertal, by around 14, 15, 16 years of age, the EEG remits. So we don't wait for EEG remission in benign Rolandic epilepsy. We can withdraw the medication. So there are obviously exceptions. 2 years seizure-free period taper. See, the 2 year is very arbitrary. We don't know where the 2 years came from. So 2 years seizure freedom does not guarantee you the patient will be completely seizure free after medication withdrawal. So it's not one size fits all again when you are tapering the medication. So So it depends on the child's developmental status, depends on the etiology, depends on the epilepsy type. So these are the three most common determinants that will tell you the seizure recurrence risk. If there is a child who is developmentally delayed and having a drop attacks or Lennox-Gastaut syndrome or bad epilepsy, even after 2 to 3 years of seizure freedom, I will be very skeptical about completely taking the patient on all the medications. So you need to be at least, if the patient is on 3 medication, you can reduce it to 2. You can reduce the doses of the other medication and see. But 2 years seizure freedom is very arbitrary, very subjective. So you cannot apply that for all the patients. Usually this 2 year seizure freedom came about from focal epilepsies that are benign, like benign occipital epilepsy, benign Rolandic epilepsy. These are the most common epilepsies that we come across in children, and these are benign syndromes. They usually, after 2 to 3 years of seizure freedom, they go into complete remission. The recurrence rate in them is very, very low after 2 years of seizure freedom. That is how this 2 year seizure freedom came, but it's very arbitrary. Which epilepsies need lifelong treatment? I told you examples of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome or juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, and those patients who failed antiepileptic medication withdrawal twice, they need to be on a, may not be lifelong, but need to be on a long-term antiepileptic medication. Yeah, very important question. How often to repeat EEG after medication treatment? EEG role, today we have not covered that because the scope of today's talk is different, but EEG is for diagnosis. EEG is for diagnosis. There is no role for therapeutic monitoring by doing repeated serial EEGs every visit, 3 months, 6 months. No. So you get the diagnosis, give the antiepileptic medication, the patients are completely seizure free. Before deciding to withdraw the medication after 2 to 3 years, that is the time you take EEG. We don't take EEG just like that for serial monitoring of treatment. Infantile spasm treatment of choice, oral prednisolone can be very effective. Oral prednisolone and ACTH both are first line choice for infantile spasms. If they are not responding to this or partially effective, then you have to add vigabatrin to the steroids, and usually they require longer treatment. Yeah, febrile seizure prevention, someone is asking. See, the intermittent clobazam prophylaxis for febrile seizure is very Indian phenomenon. If you go to any Western country, European country, North America or Australia, you will not come across pediatricians prescribing intermittent clobazam therapy even after frequent febrile seizures, like having 4 or 5 episodes every year. So there is no role for intermittent clobazam prophylaxis at all. Why? Because whether you give clobazam or not, it's not going to make any difference to your future epilepsy. So the treatment, the aim of the treatment in febrile seizure is to basically prevent febrile status epilepticus. That can be done, achieved with nasal midazolam drops, nasal midazolam spray that is commercially available. That is the emergency rescue medication we use. We do not give clobazam intermittent prophylaxis to all the children. Yeah, treatment of hyperexpressia on clonazepam. Yeah, clonazepam is the drug of choice for hyperexpressia, and usually they do well. There is nothing called abdominal epilepsy. Usually pediatricians or older physicians, they confuse these abdominal migraine and epilepsy together and call it abdominal epilepsy. There is no abdominal epilepsy. There are eating epilepsy, that is a different syndrome, that's a reflex epilepsy. There is no abdominal epilepsy. Many textbooks, many literature are very vague and confusing about abdominal migraine and abdominal epilepsy. The cyclical vomiting syndrome, some people consider as abdominal migraine. So there is no abdominal epilepsy. Yeah, I didn't go specifically into epilepsy surgery today because the scope of today's talk is mainly the newer anti-epileptic medication. Even though I'm very passionate about role of epilepsy surgery in drug-resistant epilepsy. So any patient who has a lesion on the MRI, any patient who has a lesion on the MRI, any patient who is refractory to 2 or 3 anti-epileptic medication should be at the earliest referred to a center that has experience in pediatric epilepsy surgery. So any child that fails 2 anti-epileptic medication, any child that has MRI lesion, these are the 2 criteria we should use for early referral, because a patient that can be made completely cured of seizure, completely seizure free after a focal resective epilepsy surgery is curative option. There is a notion even among many pediatric neurologists and pediatricians that the epilepsy surgery is the last resort option after you exhaust all the medication. That is wrong. So epilepsy surgery in a selective patient can be curative, and it should be done at the earliest. So any of these drug resistant epilepsy or patient with MRI lesion should be referred to the centers with experience in pediatric epilepsy surgeries. Drop attack is a very difficult seizures to treat. They can be very refractory. So we usually use valproate, zonisamide, clobazam combination to treat drop attacks. Topiramate can be alternative. Lamotrigine can work, but it's very difficult epilepsy to treat, especially those patients neonatal hypoglycemic brain injury with bilateral parieto-occipital gliosis. That is one of the common scenarios where we come across drop attacks. Many times they can be very injurious drop attacks because they have a symmetrical bilateral gliosis in the bilateral occipital lobes. Many times they are not candidates for surgery also. So it's a difficult epilepsy to treat. In case 5, absent seizures with myoclonic jerks, using lamotrigine did not worsen myoclonic jerk. That's a very good question. See, basically these are absences with perioral myoclonia. That patient had a very specific rare epilepsy syndrome of absences with perioral myoclonia. These myoclonic jerks usually don't get worsened by lamotrigine. Again, these are common guidelines and these are common rules. But even in juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, many patients don't get worsening of myoclonic jerks with lamotrigine. So we would still try in some patients with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy and myoclonic jerks. We would still try go slowly on lamotrigine. If they are already refractory, it is worthwhile trying. It's not invariably all of the patients get worsening of myoclonic jerks with lamotrigine. Some patients do, but not all. Okay, LFT renal functions are needed before starting newer antiepileptic drugs. No, we do not monitor LFT. We do not do renal function tests before starting newer antiepileptic drugs. No need to do that. There is no guideline asking for you to do that. Genetic screening of HLA 1502 required when carbamazepine is being started. Yes, it is a good practice to do HLA 1502, HLA B 1502. Phenotyping before carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine is given, because of the Stevens-Johnson risk is very high in these patients. But practically, we don't do that often. Okay, we don't do that often. To the extent nowadays, we don't use carbamazepine at all. In my personal practice or in many of our colleagues, we don't use carbamazepine at all for this reason. If we have to use, we use oxcarbazepine. The risk of Stevens-Johnson syndrome with oxcarbazepine is very less, but it's not zero. It is still the risk. The best practice would be you can do the HLA typing, or you give a slow titration. All these hypersensitivity reactions are dose dependent. Even though they are idiosyncratic, they are dependent on the dose also. So the combination of the two. So you titrate the medication very slowly and warn the patient always that any of these medication can cause allergic skin reactions. Please come back immediately if you get any allergic reaction. So that is the strategy we should use, and you have to stop the medication if they get. By using this strategy, most of the patients do not get allergic reaction when you go slow on titration. Even if they get allergic reaction, you can stop the medication at the earliest so that they don't go into the full-blown Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Okay, drug of choice for gelastic seizure. Gelastic seizure again is a focal epilepsy, hypothalamic hamartoma situation. So I would use oxcarbazepine as a first choice medication for any focal epilepsy, including gelastic seizures. So carbamazepine, oxcarbazepine can be very effective. How to suspect metabolic epilepsy in a child? So it's like any of your metabolic syndromes, like you have many of the pointers like consanguineous parents and sibling history, bad obstetric history, or infant deaths, or any family members being affected with developmental delay, autism, speech delay, epilepsy. These kind of family history you will go into to look at the metabolic syndromes. So with that, I think most of the questions we have covered. With that, once again, I thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much. Have a good night and keep safe from the pandemic. Thank you.